The first thing Naomi noticed was the flight attendant's smile. Bright, polished, and utterly fake. It vanished the moment their fingers brushed during boarding, replaced by something colder. "Seat 24B," the woman said, avoiding Naomi's eyes like she was something to be endured. But in 6 hours, that same flight attendant would be begging for Naomi's help when armed hijackers stormed the cockpit. And the woman who'd been treated as invisible would become the only one who could save them all. But here's what you don't know yet. Something will happen next in this story that you would have never imagined. This isn't just about survival at 30,000 feet. This isn't just about prejudice meeting courage. This is about a secret hidden on board, one that will turn a routine flight into a nightmare no passenger saw coming. The hijackers think they're in control. The flight attendant thinks she knows who Naomi is. But the truth, the real danger isn't who they expect. From which country are you enjoying this story? Let us know in the comments. And subscribe now, because this flight is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Buckle up. It's going to be a turbulent ride.
The line moved slowly, as it always did. Naomi adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and shuffled forward, her boarding pass clutched in her hand. The airport hummed around her, the muffled announcements over the speakers, the rolling suitcases, the impatient sighs of travelers ready to be home. She had flown enough times to know the rhythm of it all. But no matter how many flights she took, there was one thing she could never get used to: the way their eyes slid over her. Or worse, the way they lingered. She reached the front of the line and handed her ticket to the flight attendant. The woman, Lynn, according to her name tag, flashed a practiced smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind reserved for customers, not people. Naomi had seen it 1,000 times before. Then, as Naomi's fingers brushed against hers, something shifted. The smile didn't vanish. Not exactly. It just tightened. Like Lynn had tasted something bitter and was forcing herself not to react. "Seat 24B, Lynn said, her voice pleasant but distant. She didn't look at Naomi. Not really. Her gaze flickered somewhere past her shoulder, as if making eye contact was too much to ask. Naomi forced a nod and moved past her, down the narrow aisle of the plane. She knew better than to let it bother her. She had spent her whole life learning how to shrink, how to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. But no matter what she did, there were always people who looked at her like she was taking up too much space just by existing. She found her seat, a window spot near the back, and settled in, tucking her bag beneath the seat in front of her. The man beside her, a middle-aged guy in a wrinkled suit, barely glanced up from his phone as she sat down. She exhaled, relieved. At least he wasn't the type to tense up when she got too close. The plane filled slowly. A family with 2 young kids struggled with their carry-ons. An elderly couple moved carefully down the aisle, holding onto the seats for balance. A group of college-aged guys laughed too loudly near the front, already buzzed from airport drinks. Naomi watched them all, her fingers tapping absently against her armrest. Then she saw Lynn again. The flight attendant moved through the cabin with effortless grace, helping passengers stow their luggage, offering polite nods and smiles. She stopped to chat with an older white woman about the weather. She knelt to help a little girl buckle her seatbelt. She even laughed at something a businessman said, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder for a second too long. But when Naomi pressed the call button, just once, just to ask for a glass of water, Lynn's expression flattened. She didn't come right away. Naomi watched as she finished a conversation with another passenger, then checked on someone else, then adjusted the overhead bins near the front. 10 minutes passed. Naomi pressed the button again. This time, Lynn approached, her steps clipped. "Yes. Could I get some water, please?" Naomi kept her voice neutral. Lynn's lips thinned. "I'll see what I can do." She walked away without another word. Naomi leaned back in her seat, her jaw tight. She wasn't surprised. Disappointed, maybe, but not surprised. Another flight attendant, a younger black woman with her hair in neat braids, appeared a few minutes later with a plastic cup. "Sorry about the wait," she murmured, handing it to Naomi. Naomi took it with a small, grateful nod. She didn't need to ask why Lynn hadn't come back. She knew. The plane rumbled to life around them, the engines whining as they taxied toward the runway. Naomi stared out the window, watching the ground move beneath them. She had been looking forward to this trip, a few days in LA for her sister's wedding, a chance to relax. But now, the familiar weight settled in her chest again, the one that reminded her that no matter where she went, some people would always make sure she didn't forget her place. The takeoff was smooth. The seatbelt sign dinged off. People around her shifted, pulling out laptops, opening books, settling in for the long flight. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to let it go. It wasn't worth the energy. Then she heard it, a sharp, muffled sound from the front of the plane. Her eyes snapped open. At first, she thought it was nothing. Maybe someone had dropped something. But then she saw the way the passengers near the front had gone still, the way their shoulders tensed. A man stood abruptly from his seat, tall, broad-shouldered, his face unreadable. He moved too quickly, too purposefully, toward the cockpit. Naomi's stomach dropped. She had seen that kind of movement before. She knew what it meant. Another man, this one near the back, stood as well. His hand was in his jacket pocket, gripping something. The first man reached the cockpit door, and then everything happened at once. A shout, a scream, the metallic click of a gun's safety being flicked off. "Don't move!" The man's voice was loud, commanding. "Everyone stay in your seats." Chaos erupted. A woman near the front sobbed. A child whimpered. The man near the back pulled his hand from his pocket, and the glint of metal caught the light. Naomi's breath came fast. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had trained for this, years ago, in another life. But training didn't prepare you for the real thing. The hijackers barked orders, their voices sharp with tension. One of them dragged the pilot from the cockpit, shoving him into the aisle. The other kept his gun trained on the passengers, his eyes scanning for any sign of resistance. Naomi forced herself to stay still, to think. Then, movement beside her. Lynn, the flight attendant who had barely glanced at her before, was crouched low, her back pressed against the seats. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, and for the first time, she looked directly at Naomi. Her lips formed a single, silent word. "Help." The plastic cup trembled in Naomi's hand as she stared at Lynn's terrified face. The flight attendant's perfectly styled hair had come loose around her face, her professional mask completely shattered. That single word, "help," hung between them like a live wire. Naomi's military training surfaced before she could think. Her body remembered what to do even as her mind raced. Asterisk assess. Adapt. Act. Asterisk she forced her breathing to slow, counting silently in her head like her drill sergeant had taught her. The shaking in her hands stopped. Across the aisle, a toddler started crying. One of the hijackers, the taller one near the front, snapped his head toward the sound. "Shut that kid up," he barked, waving his gun. The mother clutched her child to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she tried to muffle the sobs against her shoulder. Naomi's fingers tightened around the cup. The ice had melted, leaving behind tepid water that sloshed against the sides. Pathetic weapon. But it was something. Lynn's manicured nails dug into Naomi's forearm. "Please," she whispered, so low Naomi barely heard it over the engines. You were military, right? I saw your tattoo when you boarded." The semicolon inked on Naomi's wrist. Most people assumed it was some trendy tattoo. Few recognized it as the mark of a combat medic who'd served in the sandbox. Naomi didn't answer. Her eyes tracked the second hijacker making his way down the aisle, checking rows. He paused near a man in a Yankees cap, jabbing the gun toward his face. "Wallet. Phone. Now." The passenger fumbled with trembling hands. The hijacker snatched the items and moved on. Lynn's grip became painful. "They're going to kill us," she breathed. "I heard them talking. They want quiet." Naomi's voice came out sharper than she intended. The hijacker near them glanced up. For a heart-stopping second, his gaze locked onto them. Naomi dropped her eyes immediately, slouching in her seat like the frightened civilian she was supposed to be. The man grunted and moved past. Naomi waited until he was several rows away before turning back to Lynn. "What did you hear?" Lynn's lips trembled. They're not just hijacking. They're going to crash it. Like 9/11. They kept saying, the package is on board. And a cold wave washed over Naomi. She'd seen the aftermath of IEDs, of suicide bombers. The idea of being trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet with that kind of threat made her stomach lurch. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, bouncing sharply. Several passengers gasped. The hijacker near the cockpit shouted something in a language Naomi didn't recognize. The other one answered, his voice tight with tension. Naomi's mind raced. Even if she could take out one, the other would start shooting. And if there was a bomb on board? Then she noticed something. The second hijacker kept touching his left side, just below his ribs. Every few steps, his hand would drift there, pressing lightly. An injury, or her breath caught. A gunshot wound. Fresh enough that it still pained him. That changed things. Lynn followed her gaze. What are you thinking? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She was mentally mapping the plane's layout. Galley locations. Emergency exits. How many flight attendants were there? 3, including Lynn. Any air marshals? Unlikely, or they would have acted by now. The hijacker with the injury paused near the restroom. As he turned to shout at a passenger, Naomi caught the dark stain seeping through his shirt. Definitely wounded, and getting sloppier by the minute. She made her decision. Listen carefully, Naomi whispered, turning fully toward Lynn for the first time. When I move, you need to... A scream cut her off. Near the front, a woman had stood up, her hands raised. Please, I need my medication. I have a heart condition. The lead hijacker swung his weapon toward her. Sit down. I can't. I'll die. The woman swayed dramatically, clutching her chest. It's in my bag. Naomi's eyes narrowed. The performance was too polished. This wasn't panic. This was deliberate. As the hijacker stepped closer to the woman, shouting in her face, Naomi saw her chance. The injured hijacker had turned to watch the commotion, his back partially to her. Now, she surged forward, the flimsy plastic cup forgotten as her hands found the hijacker's wounded side. He gasped as her fingers dug into the injury, his body arching in pain. Before he could shout, Naomi brought her knee up hard between his legs. The man crumpled with a choked groan. His gun clattered to the floor. Naomi dove for it, her fingers closing around the grip just as shouts erupted behind her. Too late. The lead hijacker had seen. Time slowed. Naomi rolled, bringing the gun up as the remaining hijacker fired. The shot went wide, shattering a window 2 rows back. Oxygen masks dropped as the cabin pressure changed with a deafening roar. Passengers screamed, scrambling over each other in panic. The hijacker took aim again, but before he could fire, the heart-patient woman tackled him from behind. Naomi didn't hesitate. She was on her feet, moving forward in a crouch. The injured hijacker at her feet groaned, reaching for her ankle. She kicked him hard in the temple, and he went still. More gunfire. The woman who'd tackled the leader went down with a cry, clutching her shoulder. The hijacker stood, his face a mask of rage as he leveled his weapon at her head. Naomi fired first. The shot took him in the thigh. He screamed, collapsing against the seats. Before he could recover, Naomi was on him, driving the butt of her gun into his temple. Once, twice. Silence. Then chaos erupted. Real panic now as passengers realized what had happened. The plane lurched violently, sending Naomi crashing into a seat. The cockpit, with the pilot dragged out. She turned toward Lynn, who was staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. Can you fly this thing? Lynn shook her head mutely. Naomi swore. The heart-patient woman groaned, clutching her bleeding shoulder. I can help. Private pilot's license. Not jets, but it would have to do. Naomi hauled her up, supporting her weight as they staggered toward the cockpit. Behind them, Lynn began shouting orders to passengers, her flight attendant training kicking in despite the terror in her eyes. The cockpit door hung open. The co-pilot lay slumped in his seat, blood trickling from a head wound. The main controls. Naomi's stomach dropped. The primary flight display showed flashing warnings. They were losing altitude fast. The woman beside her groaned. "Oh God! They disabled the autopilot. And look!" She pointed a shaking finger at a blinking device wired near the throttle. Naomi's blood ran cold. The package Lynn had mentioned. A bomb. The blinking device emitted a soft, rhythmic beep that seemed to sync with Naomi's pounding heartbeat. Up close, she could see the crude wiring, not military grade, but terrifyingly effective. A mess of colored cables snaked from a brick of C4 to a digital timer currently displaying 1732, 1731, 1730. The wounded woman, Sarah, she gasped out moments earlier, slumped against the co-pilot's seat, her face ashen. "Pressure trigger," she muttered through clenched teeth. "If we descend too fast." Naomi didn't need her to finish the sentence. She'd seen enough IEDs in Kabul to know how this worked. The bomb was rigged to detonate if their altitude changed too rapidly, which meant no emergency landing, no sudden maneuvers. Somewhere behind them, Lynn's voice cut through the cabin's chaos. "Everyone remain calm. Put your oxygen masks on first before helping others." The professional cadence of her emergency training barely masked the tremor beneath. Naomi kept her hands steady as she examined the device. No obvious failsafe. No way to. A groan from the co-pilot. His eyelids fluttered, revealing bloodshot whites. "Wah! The captain!" "Stay still," Naomi ordered, pressing him back down as he tried to rise. A quick assessment showed the head wound looked worse than it was, a glancing blow from a pistol whip. The real danger was the bomb taped to the throttle console. Sarah reached for the controls with her good arm. "I can try to maintain altitude, but..." She hissed as the movement jarred her bullet wound. Blood seeped through her fingers where she clutched her shoulder. "I don't know if I can." The plane lurched violently to port. Naomi grabbed the overhead panel to keep from falling as several oxygen masks tore free from the ceiling. Outside the cockpit window, storm clouds loomed where there had been clear skies moments before. "Microburst," the co-pilot mumbled, struggling to focus. "Radar didn't. They must have disabled." Sarah wrestled with the yoke, her knuckles whitening. The altimeter spun wildly before stabilizing at 28,000 feet. Too close. The bomb's pressure trigger would have a narrow threshold. Naomi made a decision. "Can you two keep us level?" Sarah nodded weakly. The co-pilot managed a thumbs up. She turned toward the cabin. Lynn stood braced between two seats, helping an elderly man with his mask. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. No words needed. The flight attendant hurried forward, dodging debris in the aisle. "They're securing the hijackers," Lynn reported, her voice low. A cut on her forehead dripped blood down her temple. "But we've got 3 critical injuries back there. And the comms are jammed or destroyed, I know." Naomi wiped sweat from her eyes. The cabin temperature was rising despite the altitude. "Listen carefully. There's a bomb." Lynn's breath hitched. For a split second, the polished professional vanished, revealing raw terror beneath. Then it was gone, replaced by grim determination. "What do you need?" 3 things. First, every belt, scarf, and shoelace from first-class passengers. Second, the emergency medical kit. Third, Naomi hesitated. That man in 12C, the one wearing the veteran's hat. Lynn's eyes widened in understanding. She turned without another word, already calling out instructions to nearby passengers. Naomi returned to the bomb. 14:22 on the timer now. The wiring was amateur work, no redundancies, no anti-tamper triggers. Probably designed to ensure the hijackers couldn't be talked out of their mission. She traced the main lead with her eyes, mentally cataloging each connection point. A commotion in the cabin. Raised voices. Then Lynn returned with a stocky black man in his late 50s, his Vietnam veteran's cap clutched in one hand. "Staff Sergeant Dwight Powell," he said by way of greeting, taking in the bomb with a practiced eye. "EOD, 71 to 74. You, Medic, 2012 to 2016. Naomi moved aside to give him space. Pressure trigger tied to altitude. Primary detonator looks like a standard cell phone receiver, but But that secondary lead's hooked to the cabin pressure sensor, Powell finished, squatting with a grunt. His hands, though wrinkled, didn't tremble as he examined the device. Son of a bitch built in a backup. You try to disarm it conventionally, we lose air pressure, boom. Sarah made a choked noise from the pilot's seat. The plane wobbled before she corrected. We can't stay up here forever. Fuels. I know. Naomi's mind raced. Sergeant, if we... A new voice cut through the intercom static. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Everyone froze. The voice was wrong. Too smooth. Too calm. And coming from the cockpit speakers despite the empty captain's chair. Naomi's head snapped up. A small LED near the radio console blinked red. A frequency they hadn't been monitoring. "Oh God," Lynn whispered. "There's a third hijacker." The voice continued, almost conversational. "I see you've been very busy. But I'm afraid this flight was never about reaching an alternate destination." Powell's fingers hovered millimeters from the bomb's wiring. "That's no amateur," he muttered. "That's a pro." The LED blinked faster. The voice dropped to a whisper. 17 minutes. Friends. Then we all meet our maker." The radio went dead. Outside the cockpit windows, the storm clouds darkened. The silence in the cockpit pressed against Naomi's eardrums like deep water. The blinking red LED had gone dark, leaving only the steady countdown of the bomb's timer, 16:38, 16:37, 16:36, to mark the passage of time. Sarah's breathing had become ragged in the pilot's seat. Blood from her shoulder wound had soaked through the makeshift bandage Lynn had applied, dripping steadily onto the yoke. "We need..." She swallowed hard. "Need to declare an emergency. Try the radio again." The co-pilot Mark, according to his name tag, reached for the headset with shaking hands. Static hissed through the speakers as he cycled through frequencies. "Mayday, mayday, this is..." A burst of electronic noise cut him off. Then the voice returned, colder now. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Naomi's head snapped up. The LED remained dark. The voice wasn't coming through the radio this time. It echoed from the cabin's PA system. Lynn paled. "He's in the avionics bay." Powell didn't look up from the bomb. "Which means he's got access to every system on this bird." His fingers hovered over a blue wire. "Kid, you ever defused one of these with your teeth?" Mark blinked at him. "What?" "Old EOD joke." Powell's hands remained steady. "Naomi, I need you to go play detective. Find our mystery man." The plane lurched again, sending a pen rolling across the floor. Outside, lightning flickered in the growing storm. Naomi hesitated, her eyes on the bomb. "Go," Powell said quietly. "I've disarmed prettier things than this with a paperclip and gum." She moved. The cabin looked like a war zone. Debris littered the aisles, spilled drinks, discarded shoes. A child stuffed animal trampled near row 10. Passengers huddled in their seats, some praying, others simply staring blankly ahead. Several were tending to the wounded, using torn shirts as makeshift bandages. Lynn fell into step beside her. "Avionics bay is below the front galley," she murmured. "Access panel under the coffee makers." Naomi nodded. "How many crew on board?" 5 total. 2 flight attendants up here, 2 in back, plus the captain and first officer, but... Her voice caught. "We haven't found the captain yet." A chill ran down Naomi's spine. She scanned the cabin, noting faces. The college kids had sobered up fast. One was pressing a sweatshirt against the leg wound of the businessman who'd flirted with Lynn earlier. The elderly couple clutched each other's hands, their lips moving in silent prayer. Then she saw him. Row 15, window seat. A man in his late 30s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit. He wasn't huddled like the others. Wasn't praying or crying. He sat perfectly still, watching the chaos with an expression of detached interest. As if this were all some mildly entertaining performance. Their eyes met. Something flickered in his gaze, recognition? Amusement? Then it was gone, replaced by polite concern. He raised a hand slightly, as if to say, "Can I help you?" Naomi started toward him. A scream from the rear restroom. She turned just as the door burst open and a young flight attendant, Tasha, the one who'd brought her water earlier, stumbled out. Her uniform was torn, her face ashen. "He's," she pointed back toward the tiny bathroom. "The captain." Naomi was moving before she finished speaking. The restroom smelled of copper and vomit. Captain Raymond Cho lay half-propped against the sink, his uniform shirt dark with blood. His eyes fluttered open as Naomi knelt beside him. "Third, hijacker." He gasped. A bubble of blood formed on his lips. "Not passenger." Naomi pressed her hands against the worst of the wounds. "Who is he?" Cho's fingers dug into her wrist. "Crew." His breath came in wet rasps. "New flight engineer. Boarded last minute. New systems." The pieces clicked together. The voice on the PA. The disabled communications. The way the bomb was wired directly into the plane's pressure sensors. Lynn appeared in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God, Captain." "Listen," Cho gasped. "Override code for autopilot." He recited a string of numbers, his voice growing fainter with each digit. "Must reach." His body convulsed once, then went still. Naomi checked for a pulse. Nothing. She closed his eyes with 2 fingers and stood. Lynn blocked her path. "The new flight engineer. I never saw him. They said he was doing pre-flight checks when we boarded." Her voice shook. "But that means he's been down there the whole time. Watching. Waiting." From the cockpit, Powell shouted something unintelligible. The plane banked sharply to the right, sending luggage tumbling from overhead bins. A woman screamed as a suitcase struck her shoulder. Naomi grabbed Lynn's arms. "That access panel. Can we get to it without him seeing?" Lynn nodded jerkily. "Service corridor behind first class. But if he's monitoring systems, then we give him something else to monitor." Naomi turned toward the cabin, raising her voice. "I need 3 volunteers. Now." The suited man from row 15 was the first on his feet. The businessman with the leg wound struggled up next, leaning heavily on a seatback. To Naomi's surprise, the elderly woman from row 8 stood as well, her hands steady despite the plane's turbulence. "Here's what we're going to do," Naomi said, pitching her voice so the surrounding passengers could hear. She pointed to the businessman. "You're going to start a diversion near the front galley. Make noise. Pretend to be having a medical emergency." She turned to the elderly woman. "When he looks your way, I need you to pull this." Naomi handed her the emergency hatch release pin from the nearest door. "Just the pin, not the handle. It'll trigger a warning light in the avionics bay." Finally, she addressed the suited man. "And you, Gabriel," he supplied smoothly. His cufflinks gleamed as he adjusted them. "Gabriel, you're going to help me remove that coffee maker." His eyebrow arched slightly, but he nodded. The diversion worked better than Naomi expected. The businessman collapsed dramatically near the front restroom, howling about chest pains. Several passengers, catching on, began shouting for help. As predicted, a new light flashed on the cockpit panel, a yellow warning indicating a door alert. Naomi and Gabriel moved. The coffee maker came free with a metallic screech, revealing a narrow maintenance hatch beneath. A faint glow of electronics shone through the cracks. Gabriel's hand closed around Naomi's wrist before she could lift the panel. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You should know," he murmured, so only she could hear. "I didn't volunteer to be a hero." Before she could respond, he reached into his jacket and produced a slim silver badge. The embossed letters read DHS. "Federal Air Marshal," he said quietly. "And that man below us? I've been tracking him for 6 months." Below their feet, something clicked. The bomb's timer, visible through the cockpit doorway, suddenly accelerated. 8:59 became 8:30 in the blink of an eye. Gabriel's face went grim. "He knows we're here." From the depths of the avionics bay, a voice chuckled over the PA. Tick-tock. The digital numbers blurred as the timer accelerated. 7:45. 07:30. 07:15. Each second slipping away faster than the last. Naomi's stomach dropped as she realized the hijacker wasn't just monitoring them. He was actively taunting them, speeding up their countdown to 0. Gabriel's grip on her wrist tightened. "He's rigged the system to override manual inputs," he muttered, eyes scanning the exposed wiring beneath the coffee maker. "Standard protocols won't work." From the cockpit, Powell shouted a curse. "Kid, we got a problem. This thing just rearmed itself." Naomi didn't waste time responding. She dropped to her knees, peeling back the access panel fully to reveal a cramped crawlspace filled with humming servers and snaking cables. A faint red glow pulsed from deep within, the avionics bay's emergency lighting. And somewhere in that maze of electronics, their unseen enemy watched. Lynn appeared at her shoulder, her flight attendant's composure fraying at the edges. "There's a service ladder near the rear galley," she whispered. "Leads directly to the lower deck." Gabriel shook his head. "He'll have that covered." His fingers traced a particular cluster of wires leading downward. "These feed the PA system. If we sever..." A gunshot rang out from below. The bullet tore through the aluminum flooring between them, missing Naomi's knee by inches. Passengers screamed as a second shot followed, this one punching through an overhead bin. A shower of luggage rained down. Gabriel moved instantly, shoving Naomi aside as he returned fire through the opening. The deafening report of his sidearm left Naomi's ears ringing. Somewhere in the avionics bay, metal clanged against metal. A body falling? Silence. Then laughter. The PA crackled to life again. "Very good, Marshal. But you'll need to do better than that." The voice was breathless now, pained. "A wounded animal, but still dangerous. Shall we make this more interesting?" The plane lurched violently as the autopilot disengaged. Sarah's scream from the cockpit was cut short by the sound of Powell swearing as he grabbed the controls. The horizon tilted sickeningly as the Boeing 737 went into a steep dive. Naomi's stomach climbed into her throat as loose items became projectiles. A laptop slammed into the bulkhead beside her head. Oxygen masks swung like pendulums. The cabin pressure dropped sharply, causing ears to pop and a dull roar to fill the air. Gabriel braced himself in the galley doorway. "He's overriding the flight controls." Somewhere below their feet, the hijacker was flying the plane remotely and taking them straight down. The altimeter spun wildly. 22,000 feet. 21,500. 21,000. Naomi made a split-second decision. She grabbed the fire axe from its recessed panel near the galley and swung it hard at the access opening. The blade bit deep, widening the hole enough for a person to slip through. "I'm going down." Lynn's protest was cut off as the plane banked sharply left. Naomi didn't wait. She lowered herself through the opening, dangling for a terrifying moment before dropping into darkness. The avionics bay was a claustrophobic tunnel of blinking lights and whirring machinery, barely high enough to crouch in. The red emergency lighting cast everything in a bloody glow. Wires brushed against her face like spiderwebs as she moved forward, the axe heavy in her hands. A metallic click to her left. Naomi ducked just as another gunshot rang out, the bullet sparking off a server rack. She caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting between equipment bays. Then another sound froze her blood. The hiss of something pressurizing. Hydraulics. The bay door at the rear of the compartment was opening. The hijacker was trying to depressurize the entire plane. Naomi lunged forward, axe raised. She rounded a bank of servers and came face to face with a nightmare. The flight engineer, a gaunt man in his 40s with close-cropped gray hair, stood braced against the manual override lever for the cargo door. Blood soaked his left sleeve where Gabriel's bullet had grazed him. In his other hand, he held a detonator wired directly into the plane's systems. "Ah, the medic." His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I wondered when you'd join us." Naomi's grip tightened on the axe. "You don't have to do this." The engineer smiled, revealing crooked teeth. "Oh, but I do." His thumb hovered over the detonator's trigger. "This was always the plan. The others were just distractions." Outside the thin metal skin of the plane, the scream of wind grew louder as the cargo door inched open. The pressure differential made Naomi's ears pop painfully. Any minute now, anything not bolted down would be sucked out into the void. The engineer's eyes flicked to a monitor displaying the cabin above. Naomi followed his gaze, The screen showed Gabriel helping Powell wrestle with the controls as the plane continued its death dive. Lynn was securing passengers, her face a mask of terror. And then Naomi saw it. A flicker of hesitation in the engineer's expression when he looked at Lynn. A microsecond of doubt. Naomi shifted her stance, lowering the axe slightly. "You know they'll blame her, right?" The engineer blinked. "What? Lynn?" Naomi nodded toward the screen. First officer goes down. Flight attendant takes the blame. Always happens. Especially to women like her. A muscle twitched in the engineer's jaw. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Naomi saw it. The crack in his armor. She pressed harder. "That's why you chose this flight, isn't it? Because of her." The plane shuddered violently as the cargo door opened another inch. Alarms blared throughout the bay. The engineer's hand wavered on the detonator. Naomi took a step forward. "Whatever they promised you, whatever they're holding over you, it's not worth killing all these people." For the first time, uncertainty flashed across the engineer's face. His eyes darted to a small photo taped to the console. A younger Lynn, standing with two men in military uniforms. One was clearly the engineer himself. The other, Naomi understood. "Your brother." The engineer's breath hitched. His finger trembled on the detonator. Outside, the storm raged. The plane groaned like a living thing as the structural integrity began to fail. Somewhere above, a child was crying. Naomi made her move. The axe slipped from Naomi's fingers as she lunged, not toward the detonator, but for the photograph. Her fingers grazed the worn edges just as the engineer's grip tightened on the trigger. His eyes widened in realization. She wasn't attacking him. She was attacking his reason. The cargo door shrieked another inch open. A coffee cup from the galley above tumbled past Naomi's head, sucked into the howling void. The pressure drop made her eardrums feel ready to burst. His name was Daniel, wasn't it? Naomi shouted over the roaring wind. She held up the photo, angling it so the emergency lights caught Lynn's smiling face beside the two soldiers. "Your brother. And hers." The engineer froze. His lips formed a word that was lost in the chaos, but Naomi didn't need to hear it. The pain in his eyes said everything. Above them, the plane's dive steepened. Through the grating underfoot, Naomi could see Powell and Gabriel fighting the controls, their faces slick with sweat. The altimeter now read 14,000 feet and dropping fast. Naomi pressed her advantage. "You blame her for his death." The engineer's hand trembled violently on the detonator. "She was supposed to be on that flight." The words tore from him like shrapnel. "Not him. Never him." The truth hit Naomi like a punch to the gut. This wasn't terrorism. This was revenge. A metallic groan echoed through the bay as the cargo door inched wider. The engineer didn't seem to notice. His entire being was focused on the photo in Naomi's hand. Tears cut tracks through the grime on his face. "She transferred last minute," he whispered. "Dan took her route as a favor. One day later and—" His thumb stroked the detonator almost lovingly. "6 years I've waited. 6 years watching her smile at passengers like nothing happened." The plane shuddered violently. Somewhere above, a structural warning blared. They were running out of time. Naomi took a careful step forward. And the bomb. The other hijackers. The engineer's laugh was hollow. Paid idiots. They thought this was about politics. About ideology. His free hand touched the bloodied sleeve where Gabriel's bullet had grazed him. This was always about her. Another step. Close enough now to see the frayed edges of his uniform. The tremor in his trigger finger. "You don't want to do this," Naomi said softly. "Not like this." The engineer's eyes flickered to the screen showing the cabin above. Lynn was crouched beside a terrified child, helping secure their oxygen mask despite her own face being pale with hypoxia. For the first time, doubt flickered across his features. The plane chose that moment to hit an air pocket. The sudden drop sent Naomi crashing to her knees. The photo slipped from her fingers, spinning toward the open cargo door. The engineer moved faster than she thought possible. He lunged, catching the picture just before it vanished into the storm. The motion brought him within arm's reach of Naomi. Their eyes locked. In that frozen instant, Naomi saw it all. The years of grief, the meticulously planned vengeance, the moment of hesitation. She made her choice. Her hand shot out, not for the detonator, but for the manual override panel beside him. Her fingers found the emergency cargo door release and yanked it hard. Hydraulics screamed as the door reversed course, slamming shut with a thunderous boom. The sudden pressure change made the engineer stagger. His finger tightened on the detonator. Naomi tackled him. They crashed into a bank of servers, wires snapping and sparking around them. The detonator skittered across the floor. The engineer scrambled for it, his nails scraping metal. Above them, the plane's nose began to lift as Powell regained some control. The engineer's head snapped up at the change in motion. His eyes widened. "You lose," Naomi gasped. His response was to smile, a terrible broken thing, and reach into his vest. The second detonator blinked red in his palm. "Not yet," he whispered. Then everything went white. The explosion wasn't the bomb. It was the emergency oxygen tanks rupturing near the galley above. The concussive force threw Naomi against the far bulkhead. Smoke poured through the access hatch's alarm she'd never heard before began wailing. The engineer was on his feet, clutching the photo in one hand, the detonator in the other. Blood dripped from a gash on his forehead, but his eyes were clear, focused. "Now we end it," he said. Naomi's vision swam. She could hear shouting from above, Gabriel calling her name, Powell cursing as he fought the controls. The plane was leveling out, but the damage was done. They were flying on borrowed time. She forced herself up. "It doesn't have to end this way." The engineer thumbed the detonator's safety off. "Yes, it does." Then three things happened at once. 1. The access hatch above burst open, revealing Gabriel with his sidearm drawn. 2. The engineer's finger tightened on the trigger. 3. Lynn's voice came through the PA, shaky but clear. "Ethan, please." The name hung in the air like a prayer. The engineer, Ethan, froze. His head tilted slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Naomi didn't hesitate. She lunged, not for the detonator this time, but for Ethan himself. Her arms wrapped around him in a tackle that carried them both into the main server bank. The impact jarred the detonator from his grip. It clattered across the floor, landing at Gabriel's feet as he dropped through the hatch. Ethan fought like a wild animal, his fists connecting with Naomi's ribs hard enough to make her gasp. But she held on, pinning him long enough for Gabriel to secure the detonator. Then Lynn was there, dropping down beside them, her uniform torn and soot-streaked. Her hands reached for Ethan's face, forcing him to look at her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I never knew it was you." Ethan's struggles ceased. His breath came in ragged sobs. "You were supposed to be on that flight." Lynn's thumbs brushed his tears. "And you were supposed to let me go." Above them, the plane leveled out completely. The screaming wind faded to a dull roar. Powell's voice came through the intercom, strained but triumphant. "We've got control. Somebody get me a damage report." Naomi became aware of several things at once. The ache in her ribs, the blood trickling from her nose, the way Ethan had gone utterly still in Lynn's arms. Gabriel holstered his weapon and reached for the detonator. "It's over." But as Naomi looked at Ethan's face, at the years of pain etched into every line, she knew the truth. For some people, it would never be over. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically in the avionics bay, casting jagged shadows across Ethan's face as he sagged against the server bank. Lynn still cradled his head in her hands, her own tears mixing with the blood on his forehead. The detonator lay harmless at Gabriel's feet, its blinking lights now dark. Naomi became aware of a sharp pain in her side with every breath, probably a cracked rib from the struggle. She pressed a hand to her ribs and winced as she straightened up. The bay smelled of burnt wiring and sweat, the air thick with the remnants of smoke from the oxygen tank explosion above. Gabriel scooped up the detonator and examined it briefly before slipping it into his pocket. His gaze never left Ethan. "You've got about 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now." Ethan didn't respond. His eyes remained locked on Lynn's, some silent communication passing between them that Naomi couldn't decipher. The plane shuddered around them as Powell adjusted course overhead. Through the open access hatch, Naomi could hear the panicked murmurs of passengers and the steady beep of medical equipment being unpacked. Someone was giving orders. Tasha, by the sound of it, to tend to the wounded. Lynn finally broke the silence. "He's Daniel's brother," she said softly, her fingers still resting against Ethan's cheeks. "His twin." Gabriel's expression didn't change, but his hand drifted away from his holstered weapon. "That doesn't explain 6 years of planning to murder a plane full of people." Ethan's laugh was a broken thing. "You think this was about them?" He gestured vaguely upward. "Collateral damage. The bomb was just insurance, in case I couldn't get to her any other way." Naomi's stomach turned. The cold calculation in his voice didn't match the tears still tracking down his face. This wasn't just grief. This was something darker, something that had festered for years. The intercom crackled. "Naomi." Powell's voice was strained. "We've got a situation up here." She moved to the ladder, pausing to glance back at Gabriel. "Can you handle this?" He nodded once, his eyes hard. "Go." The cabin looked like a triage center when Naomi emerged. Passengers with minor injuries were being treated in their seats, while the more seriously wounded had been moved to the center aisles. Tasha and the elderly woman from row 8 were moving between them with first aid kits, their hands steady despite the circumstances. Powell's voice called from the cockpit. "In here." The scene that greeted her made Naomi's breath catch. Sarah was slumped unconscious in the pilot's seat, her skin ashen. Mark, the co-pilot, was desperately trying to maintain altitude while simultaneously applying pressure to a wound on her thigh that Naomi hadn't noticed before. A deep gash that had bled through multiple makeshift bandages. "She passed out about 2 minutes ago," Powell said through gritted teeth as he fought the controls. The storm still raged outside the windows, lightning illuminating his sweat-slicked face. "Lost too much blood. And we've got another problem." He jerked his chin toward the fuel gauge. The needle hovered just above empty. Naomi didn't waste time. She dropped to Sarah's side, checking her pulse, thready but present. "How long?" "Maybe 20 minutes if we're lucky." Powell's knuckles whitened on the yoke. "And before you ask, no, we still can't radio for help. That bastard down there fried our comms good." Naomi's mind raced. 20 minutes to find a solution with an unconscious pilot, a wounded co-pilot, and no communication. Somewhere below them, a federal air marshal was guarding a would-be mass murderer. And outside, a storm that showed no signs of abating. Mark groaned as the plane hit another pocket of turbulence. "There's an airstrip," he gasped, "about 50 miles northeast of our current position. Military installation. Closed in '98, but the runway might still." The engine sputtered. All three of them froze as the familiar roar stuttered again, then caught. The fuel warning light began flashing insistently. Powell swore violently. "Change of plans. We're not making 50 miles. His eyes locked with Naomi's. "I need you to go back down there and ask our friend with the death wish if there's any way to restore partial comms. Even 30 seconds of transmission could save our asses." Naomi hesitated. Gabriel said he'd been tracking Ethan for months. "If anyone knows his methods, then go," Powell shouted as the left engine coughed again. "Before we're all taking a swim in the damn ocean." The return trip to the avionics bay felt like moving through a nightmare. The plane lurched unpredictably, forcing Naomi to brace against seats and overhead bins as she went. Passengers reached for her as she passed, their faces masks of terror, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. Gabriel had Ethan pinned against the far wall when Naomi descended the ladder. Lynn stood nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The look she gave Naomi was equal parts grief and resignation. "We need the comms," Naomi said without preamble. "Even just enough for a mayday." Ethan's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "Why would I help you?" Gabriel slammed him against the bulkhead hard enough to rattle tools loose from their racks. "Because if you don't, you die with the rest of us." For a long moment, the only sound was the labored breathing of 4 people and the ever-present scream of damaged engines. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He laughed. "You think I care about dying?" He shook his head, still chuckling. "I was ready to press that trigger 30 seconds into takeoff. The only reason we're still in the air is because I wanted her," he jerked his chin at Lynn, "to know why." Naomi stepped forward. "Then tell me this. Was Daniel really just collateral damage too?" The laughter died instantly. Ethan's face went slack. "You heard Lynn. Naomi pressed. She didn't know. She never knew it was you all these years. So if you're going to kill us all, at least tell me. Did your brother mean as little to you as all these people? The punch came faster than she expected. Ethan broke free of Gabriel's grip and swung wildly, his fist connecting with Naomi's jaw hard enough to send her crashing into a console. Pain exploded across her face, but she welcomed it, because in that moment of violence, she'd seen the truth. Ethan wasn't just angry. He was shattered. Gabriel had Ethan back in a chokehold before he could swing again. "Last chance," he growled in the man's ear. "Fix the damn radio." Ethan's chest heaved. His eyes, when they met Naomi's, were the emptiest she'd ever seen. "Fine," he spat. "But not for you." He twisted in Gabriel's grip just enough to point at a secondary access panel near the main server array. "There's a backup transceiver in there. Takes 30 seconds to warm up. You'll get your mayday." Naomi didn't wait for permission. She yanked the panel open, revealing a nest of wires and a small black box with a single status light. The switch was clearly marked, but when she flipped it, nothing happened. Ethan's chuckle was dark. "Forgot to mention, you'll need to bypass the fried primary system first." He nodded toward a particular cluster of wires. "Cut the red one." Gabriel's grip tightened. "If this is a trick, do I look like I care anymore?" Ethan's voice broke on the last word. Naomi hesitated only a second before reaching for the wire cutters hanging nearby. The red wire snapped with a satisfying click. The black box whirred to life, its status light blinking green. Powell's voice came through the intercom, tinny with static but clear. "We've got contact." "Repeat, we've got." The left engine died completely. The sudden loss of power sent the plane into a sickening lurch. Naomi was thrown against the opposite wall, her ribs screaming in protest. Gabriel lost his grip on Ethan, who scrambled for something near the main console. A gun. Naomi saw it a second too late. Ethan had the weapon leveled at Lynn's chest before anyone could react. His hand didn't shake. "Now we end it," he whispered. The shot rang out like thunder in the confined space. The gunshot echoed through the confined space, so loud it left Naomi's ears ringing. For one terrible second, she couldn't tell where the bullet had gone, only that Lynn was still standing, her face frozen in shock. Then Ethan slumped forward, revealing Gabriel behind him with his service weapon still raised. Smoke curled from the barrel. The bullet had taken Ethan high in the shoulder, spinning him around but not killing him. Lynn made a sound like a wounded animal and dropped to her knees beside Ethan as he collapsed against the console. Blood spread quickly across his already ruined uniform shirt. "You shot him," she whispered, her hands fluttering uselessly over the wound. Gabriel holstered his weapon, his face unreadable. "He was going to kill you." The plane chose that moment to lurch violently again, reminding them all that they were still in a dying aircraft. The remaining engine's whine climbed to a fever pitch as Powell fought to keep them level. Naomi grabbed the edge of the console to steady herself. "We need to get back upstairs." Ethan coughed wetly, his blood-slick fingers grasping at Lynn's sleeve. "Should've. Let me." His eyes rolled back, consciousness slipping away. Gabriel moved first, checking Ethan's pulse before hauling him over one shoulder in a fireman's carry. "He'll live to stand trial." The words were delivered with icy certainty. The climb back to the main cabin was a nightmare of bucking metal and screaming passengers. The moment Naomi's head cleared the access hatch, she was met with chaos. Oxygen masks swung from the ceiling like hanged men. A young mother clutched her screaming toddler to her chest. The businessman from earlier had torn off his dress shirt to use as a tourniquet on his own leg. Powell's voice roared from the cockpit. "Naomi, get your ass in here." She stumbled forward, dodging debris and outstretched hands. The cockpit looked like a war zone. Sarah still unconscious in the pilot's seat, Mark barely conscious as he struggled with the controls, and Powell with both hands on the yoke, his massive arms trembling with effort. "We got through," Powell shouted over the engine noise. "Coast Guard scrambling choppers, but we're not staying airborne long enough for that to matter." Naomi grabbed the co-pilot's seat as the plane hit another air pocket. "What about the airstrip Mark mentioned?" Powell's face was grim. "We'll be lucky to make a highway at this point." His eyes flicked to the fuel gauge, needle buried past empty. "That Mayday bought us one thing though. There's a container ship about 10 miles off our current heading. Big enough deck that if I can put this bird down gently." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Naomi had seen enough crash landings to know their odds. Mark groaned, his hands slipping on the controls. Flaps. Not responding. Blood dripped from a reopened wound on his temple. Naomi squeezed into the cramped space beside him, reaching for the secondary controls. "I'll handle flaps. You just keep us level." Outside the windshield, the storm raged. Rain lashed the glass in horizontal sheets. Somewhere in that maelstrom was their only chance at survival, a speck of metal in an endless ocean. The radio crackled to life. "Flight 227, this is Coast Guard Cutter Triton. We have you on radar. That container ship is the Maersk Dubai. They're clearing their deck now." Powell's knuckles whitened on the yoke. "Tell them to hurry." Naomi worked the flaps manually, her arms burning with the effort. The plane was flying like a brick now, every minor adjustment requiring Herculean effort. Behind them, the cabin had gone eerily quiet, passengers either praying or conserving oxygen as the plane descended through 8,000 feet. Then she saw it, a brief break in the clouds revealing angry gray waves below. And there, like a mirage, the unmistakable outline of a massive container ship cutting through the swells. Powell saw it too. He barked a laugh that held no humor. "Well, I'll be damned." His hands moved surely on the controls, coaxing every last bit of lift from the crippled aircraft. "Naomi, when I say now, you drop full flaps." She nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. The ship grew larger in the windshield. Too fast. They were coming in hot. The altimeter unwound with terrifying speed. 5,000, 4, 000, 3, 000. Now! Naomi threw the flap lever with both hands. The plane shuddered violently as the wings bit air, their descent slowing but not enough. The first impact was brutal. Metal screamed as the landing gear clipped the ship's superstructure. The plane cartwheeled once, twice, before slamming onto the container deck in a shower of sparks. Naomi's world dissolved into chaos, the smell of burning metal, the screams of passengers, the terrible groan of stressed aluminum. Something struck her shoulder hard. Then everything went black. Consciousness returned in fragments. The acrid taste of smoke. Hands dragging her from the wreckage. Cold rain on her face. She came to fully sprawled on the ship's deck, staring up at a circle of concerned faces. Powell hovered nearby, his arm in a makeshift sling. Gabriel stood over Ethan's still form, his weapon drawn even now. And Lynn. Lynn knelt beside her, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. "You did it," she whispered. Naomi tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through her ribs. Around them, crew members and less injured passengers were helping others from the wreck. The plane's fuselage had split just behind first class, but miraculously, there were no fires. She turned to Lynn, the question hanging between them. Lynn answered before she could ask. "Mostly minor injuries. Some broken bones. But we didn't lose anyone." Her voice broke. Even him. Naomi followed her gaze to where Ethan lay, his breathing shallow but steady. The ship's medic was working on his shoulder wound, talking quietly to Gabriel as he did. Powell helped Naomi to her feet as the first Coast Guard helicopter appeared through the clouds. "Come on, hero. Let's get you checked out." She took one last look at the wreckage of Flight 227, the twisted metal that had nearly been their coffin. The passengers embracing, weeping, praying. The container ship crew moving among them with blankets and first aid kits. And in that moment, despite the pain and the fear and the lingering horror of what might have been, Naomi felt something unexpected. Hope. They had survived. The steady thrum of helicopter blades vibrated through Naomi's bones as she sat on the deck of the Maersk Dubai, wrapped in a coarse emergency blanket that smelled of diesel and salt. Around her, the container ship's crew moved with practiced efficiency, setting up triage stations, distributing water bottles, guiding the most seriously injured toward the waiting Coast Guard helicopters. Rain still fell in sheets, but the storm's fury had lessened. The ocean swells that had seemed monstrous from the air now rolled beneath the massive ship with deceptive gentleness. Lynn appeared at her side, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Instant coffee," she said, handing one to Naomi. "Tastes like burnt tires, but it's hot." Naomi wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her bruised fingers. Up close, she could see the fine tremors running through Lynn's arms, the way her breathing hitched slightly with each exhale. Shock setting in. "You should be on the first evac," Naomi said. Lynn shook her head, her eyes fixed on the far side of the deck where a medical team was loading Ethan onto a stretcher. Gabriel stood watch nearby, his expression unreadable. "Not until all the passengers are off." A commotion near the wreckage drew their attention. Powell was arguing with a Coast Guard officer, gesturing wildly toward the broken fuselage. Even from this distance, Naomi could make out his words. "Still people in there." Naomi stood too quickly, pain lancing through her ribs. Lynn steadied her as they hurried toward the argument. The Coast Guard officer, a woman with lieutenant's bars on her rain jacket, held up a hand. "Sir, my team has cleared the aircraft 3 times. Everyone's accounted for." Powell's face was florid with anger. "Then your team can't count. We had 147 souls on that plane, and your manifest shows 146. Naomi's stomach dropped. She scanned the crowd of survivors clustered under makeshift shelters. Families huddled together. Businessmen on satellite phones. The elderly couple from row 8 helping distribute blankets. Someone was missing. Lynn paled. "The little girl," she whispered. "The one with the stuffed rabbit. She was in row 12 with her mother." Naomi was moving before the thought fully formed, pushing past startled crew members toward the gaping tear in the plane's midsection. The fuselage groaned ominously as she climbed inside, the metal still warm from friction. "Naomi, wait!" Powell's shout followed her into the wreckage. The interior was a nightmare of twisted seats and dangling wires. Emergency lighting flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows. Naomi picked her way through debris, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" A faint whimper answered. Near the rear galley, half buried under a collapsed overhead bin, a small figure stirred. The child, no more than 5 years old, lay curled around a now tattered stuffed rabbit, her face streaked with tears and soot. "It's okay," Naomi murmured, dropping to her knees beside the girl. "I've got you." The overhead bin shifted dangerously as she lifted the child. Something metallic clattered to the floor, a slim briefcase Naomi hadn't noticed before, its latches broken from the impact. Inside, nestled among foam padding, were 3 cylindrical devices that made her blood run cold. Not just bombs. Biometric triggers. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Ethan had been telling the truth. He hadn't cared about the other passengers. But someone else had. The briefcase bore a logo she recognized from news reports. Ares Defense Systems. A private military contractor currently under investigation for selling weapons to terrorist groups. The child in her arms whimpered again, bringing Naomi back to the present. She left the briefcase where it lay and carried the girl toward daylight, her mind racing. Powell met her at the rupture in the fuselage, his face slack with relief when he saw the child. He took the little girl gently, then frowned at Naomi's expression. "What is it?" She leaned close, keeping her voice low. "There's more bombs on board. Military grade. This wasn't just about revenge. We were a mule flight." Powell's grip on the child tightened imperceptibly. His eyes flicked toward the crowd on deck, now including several new Coast Guard investigators taking statements. "You're sure?" Before Naomi could answer, a new voice cut through the rain. "That's her. That's the one who saved us." The businessman with the leg wound was pointing at Naomi, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who stood out among the orange Coast Guard jackets. Their posture screamed federal agent, but something about their too-perfect coordination set Naomi's teeth on edge. The taller agent smiled as he approached. "Naomi Carter? We'd like to debrief you about the incident." His partner moved slightly to the side, blocking her path to Powell. Lynn appeared suddenly at Naomi's elbow, her flight attendant's smile firmly in place though it didn't reach her eyes. "Gentlemen, Ms. Carter needs medical attention before any interviews." The agents exchanged glances. The shorter one opened his mouth to protest when Gabriel materialized beside them, his marshal's badge glinting in the rain. "She's right. Coast Guard medics first. Then questions." A tense silence stretched. Around them, the normal chaos of the evacuation continued. Paramedics loading stretchers, crew members shouting over the wind, the ever-present thrum of helicopter blades. Finally, the tall agent nodded. "Of course. We'll speak later." As they melted back into the crowd, Gabriel's hand closed around Naomi's wrist. His whisper was barely audible over the rain. "Those weren't FBI." Naomi watched the agents make their way toward the wreckage. "Toward the briefcase." "I know." Powell shifted the sleeping child in his arms. "Then who the hell were they?" Lightning flashed, illuminating the container ship's deck with stark clarity. In that frozen moment, Naomi saw three things simultaneously. 1. The agents slipping protective gloves from their pockets as they approached the plane. 2. Lynn's face going pale as she stared at something near the medical triage area. 3. Ethan, strapped to a stretcher near the evacuation zone, suddenly struggling against his restraints, his mouth working soundlessly. Then the world exploded. The explosion wasn't from the briefcase. It came from the ship's starboard side, a deafening roar that sent a fireball climbing into the storm-darkened sky. The deck bucked violently beneath them, throwing Naomi into Gabriel as the concussion wave rippled outward. Screams erupted across the deck as passengers and crew alike were knocked off their feet. Powell went down hard, twisting his body to shield the child in his arms. The little girl woke with a shriek, her arms locking around his neck in terror. Naomi scrambled upright, her ears ringing. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw the two fake agents sprinting toward the wreckage of the plane. "Stop them!" she shouted to Gabriel, but her voice was lost in the pandemonium. The ship's alarms began wailing, a deep, mournful sound that cut through the rain. Crew members shouted in a mix of English and what sounded like Danish as they rushed toward the blast site. Lynn grabbed Naomi's arm, her nails digging in. "That was no accident," she hissed. "They're trying to destroy evidence." Naomi didn't answer. She was already moving, dodging panicked passengers and debris as she chased after the agents. Her ribs screamed with each step, but adrenaline muted the pain to a distant throb. The plane's wreckage loomed ahead, its torn metal skin glowing dully in the firelight from the ship's burning stern. The taller agent was already inside, his silhouette visible through the gaping hole in the fuselage. His partner stood guard outside, a hand resting conspicuously inside his jacket. Naomi changed course, ducking behind a stack of shipping containers to circle around. The rain and smoke provided cover as she approached from the agent's blind side. She was 10 feet away when the second explosion hit. This one came from the plane itself, a controlled detonation that sent pieces of the fuselage spinning into the air. The force knocked the standing agent off his feet, his weapon skittering across the wet deck. Naomi didn't hesitate. She lunged for the gun, her fingers closing around the grip just as the agent regained his footing. Their eyes met. He smiled, then turned and sprinted for the ship's railing. Naomi raised the weapon, but before she could fire, a new sound cut through the chaos, the staccato rhythm of helicopter blades approaching at speed. Not the Coast Guard's orange and white birds, but two sleek black choppers coming in fast from the northeast. The agent at the railing didn't pause. He vaulted over the side just as his partner emerged from the burning wreckage, the briefcase clutched in one hand. Naomi fired. The shot went wide as the ship lurched again. The second agent ducked behind a crane assembly, then darted for the opposite railing. By the time Naomi reached the spot, there was nothing but churning ocean below, and a speedboat accelerating away into the storm. Gabriel arrived at her side, breathing hard. What the hell was that? Naomi watched the black helicopters circle like vultures. Clean up crew. The implications settled over them both like a shroud. This went far beyond one disgraced flight engineer's revenge plot. The bombs, the fake agents, the precision of the explosions. This was professional. Powell joined them, the little girl now in the arms of a ship's medic. His face was grim. Coast Guard just got word. Those black choppers? No transponders. No registration. Ghost birds. Lynn appeared, her uniform torn and soot-streaked. She clutched something in her hand, a small digital recorder. "I found this in the medical tent," she said, her voice shaking. It was taped under the gurney they had Ethan on. Naomi took the device. The playback was faint under the wail of alarms, but unmistakable. Ethan's voice, ragged with pain. "They weren't my bombs. The package was already on board when they recruited me. They knew about Daniel. Knew I'd say yes. A cough, then weaker. Ares, the ship. Don't let them. The recording cut off. Gabriel's face hardened. We need to get off this ship. Now. As if on cue, one of the black helicopters banked sharply toward them, its side door sliding open to reveal a mounted weapon. Naomi didn't wait to see what happened next. Run! The first bullets tore into the deck behind them as they sprinted for cover. Powell grabbed Lynn's arm, pulling her behind a massive anchor winch as rounds sparked off the metal. The Coast Guard choppers were scrambling now, moving to intercept, but the Blackbirds were faster, more maneuverable. Naomi crouched beside Gabriel behind a shipping container, the stolen gun heavy in her hand. We can't stay here. He nodded toward the lifeboats. 30 yards to portside. Can you make it? Before she could answer, a new sound joined the chaos, the deep, resonant horn of an approaching vessel. Not just any ship, Naomi realized as she risked a glance over the container's edge. A warship. Gray and imposing, it cut through the waves like a blade, its deck bristling with armaments. The markings were clear even through the rain. USS Michael Murphy. A Navy destroyer. The black helicopters broke off immediately, banking hard away as the destroyer's deck guns tracked their movement. Over the ship's PA system, a voice boomed. Attention Maersk Dubai, this is Captain William Graves of the United States Navy. Prepare to receive boarding parties. Gabriel exhaled sharply. Well, I'll be damned. But Naomi's eyes were on Lynn, who stood frozen, staring at something near the burning wreckage of the plane. Following her gaze, Naomi saw it. A single unmarked black briefcase, identical to the one the agents had taken, wedged beneath a twisted seat, and its LED display was counting down from 2 o'clock. The numbers ticked relentlessly. 1:59, 1:58, 1:57. Naomi moved without thinking. She broke cover, ignoring Gabriel's shout and the bullets still peppering the deck around her. The briefcase was partially buried under debris, its metal surface warm to the touch. 1:42, 1:41. She flipped it open. The interior was a maze of wires and circuitry surrounding what looked like a biometric lock, a fingerprint scanner glowing faintly blue. No obvious way to disarm it. No time to try. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders. Gabriel! Leave it! He shouted over the chaos. Naomi shook her head. If this goes off near the fuel lines. The rest didn't need saying. The entire aft section of the ship would become a fireball. 1:15, 1:14. Lynn appeared beside them, her face pale but determined. Give me your hand. Before Naomi could react, Lynn grabbed her wrist and pressed Naomi's thumb against the scanner. The device beeped once, then displayed. Verification failed. 0:59, 0:58. Lynn's jaw set. She reached into her pocket and produced Ethan's ID badge. Stolen, presumably, when she'd found the recorder. She pressed his thumb against the scanner. Verification failed. 0:45, 0:44. Powell arrived, breathing hard. Navy's sending a RHIB. 60 seconds out. Gabriel eyed the timer. We don't have 60 seconds. Naomi studied the bomb's construction. Military grade, like the others, but this one was different. Sleeker, more advanced. The kind of hardware that didn't show up on the black market. 0:30, 0:29. An idea struck her. Lynn, your phone. The flight attendant blinked but handed over her cracked smartphone. Naomi ripped off the back cover and tore free the fingerprint sensor, wires trailing. 0:20, 0:19. Working quickly, she spliced the phone sensor into the bomb circuitry, her fingers moving with a medic's precision. The components weren't compatible, but she didn't need perfection, just confusion. 0:10, 0:09. The bomb's display flickered. System error. 0:05, 0:04. Naomi held her breath. The display went dark. For one endless second, no one moved. Then Powell grabbed Naomi and Lynn both, hauling them toward the portside railing where a Navy RHIB was just pulling alongside, armed sailors reaching up to help them aboard. Gabriel brought up the rear, his stolen weapon trained on the now inert briefcase until the last possible moment. As they dropped into the waiting boat, the destroyer's guns tracked the retreating black helicopters, which were now just specks on the horizon. The Navy lieutenant in command of the RHIB eyed them all with open suspicion. "Which one of you is Naomi Carter?" Naomi raised a hand, too exhausted to speak. The lieutenant nodded. "Admiral wants to see you. Immediately." As the boat accelerated toward the waiting destroyer, Naomi looked back at the Maersk Dubai. Smoke still poured from its stern, the wreckage of Flight 227 a blackened scar on its deck. And there, near the railing, stood the elderly woman from row 8, watching them go with an expression that didn't match her frail appearance at all. Before Naomi could point her out, the woman turned and melted into the crowd. The RHIB slammed against the waves as it raced toward the destroyer, each impact sending jolts of pain through Naomi's battered body. Salt spray stung her face, mixing with the blood still trickling from a cut on her temple. Beside her, Lynn gripped the safety rail with white-knuckled intensity. Her flight attendant composure finally shattered. Gabriel leaned close to Naomi, his voice barely audible over the outboard engines. "That woman back there, the old lady. You saw her too?" Naomi nodded, watching the destroyer grow larger with each passing second. Its gray hull rose from the water like a steel cliff, sailors lining the decks above. "She wasn't just a passenger," Gabriel continued, "moved like spec ops." Before Naomi could respond, the RHIB swung sharply alongside the destroyer. A rope ladder tumbled down toward them. The lieutenant at the helm gestured upward. "Admiral's waiting." Climbing one-handed with her ribs screaming in protest, Naomi focused on each rung rather than the churning ocean below. Strong hands hauled her over the rail onto the deck, where a line of armed Marines stood at attention. "Naomi Carter?" The voice came from a compact man in his late 50s, his admiral's stars gleaming on his rain-spattered jacket. His close-cropped hair was more salt than pepper, his posture rigid despite the ship's movement. "Yes, sir," Naomi managed, straightening as best she could. Admiral Kincaid studied her with eyes that missed nothing. Her torn clothing, the makeshift bandage on her wrist, the way she favored her left side. "You've had quite a morning." Behind her, Gabriel, Powell, and Lynn were being helped aboard by medics. Ethan was nowhere to be seen, likely airlifted directly to a medical facility. Kincaid gestured toward a hatch. "My ready room. Now." The walk through the ship's corridors was a blur of polished metal and bustling crew. The ready room turned out to be a cramped space dominated by a large digital map table, its surface displaying the Atlantic with several blinking markers. Kincaid closed the door, leaving them with just one other occupant, a severe-looking woman in civilian clothes who stood studying the map with unsettling intensity. "Ms. Carter," Kincaid began, "this is Deputy Director Claire Mercer of the Defense Intelligence Agency." Mercer didn't offer a handshake. Her gaze flicked from Naomi to Gabriel. "You've stumbled into something far above your pay grade." Naomi's patience snapped. "People died today. Almost 100 more could have. I think we're past pay grades." Mercer's lips thinned. She tapped the map table, zooming in on the Maersk Dubai's last known position. That plane was carrying 3 Ares, 7 biometric smart bombs, each capable of leveling a city block, each keyed to specific fingerprints. Gabriel crossed his arms. "Ethan's." "No." Mercer tapped another control. The image changed to show a mugshot, the elderly woman from row 8, now clean-faced and glaring at the camera. "Meet Colonel Irina Volkova, GRU retired. Currently freelance." Powell whistled low. "Russian intelligence?" "Former," Mercer corrected. "Now she sells her services to the highest bidder. And someone paid her very well to ensure those bombs reached U.S. soil." Lynn, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Why not just ship them normally? Why go through all this?" Mercer and Kincaid exchanged glances. It was the Admiral who answered. "Because 3 days ago, we intercepted intel about this plot. Every port from here to Lisbon has been running silent scans for Ares tech." He nodded to Naomi. They needed an invisible mule. Commercial flights aren't subject to the same scrutiny as cargo ships. The pieces clicked together in Naomi's mind. Ethan was just cover. The real payload was Volkova and her briefcases. Mercer gave a curt nod. "We believe she boarded separately in New York." The hijacking was either staged to cover her tracks, or Ethan was someone else's patsy too, Gabriel finished. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young ensign entered, saluting sharply. "Admiral, we've recovered 2 briefcases from the Maersk Dubai. EOD reports both disarmed." Kincaid's shoulders relaxed slightly. "And the third?" The ensign hesitated. "No sign, sir. But we did pick up a lifeboat launching from the starboard side during the chaos. Thermal shows it heading northeast at high speed." Mercer was already moving for the door. "Volkova." Naomi stepped forward. "You're not going after her?" Kincaid's expression turned grim. "Oh, we're going. But not with this ship." He nodded to Mercer. "This is DIA's show now." As Mercer strode out, Naomi caught Gabriel's eye. His barely perceptible nod confirmed what she already suspected. There was more going on here than either Kincaid or Mercer was telling them. Lynn touched Naomi's arm. "What happens to us now?" Before Kincaid could answer, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Admiral to the bridge. Contact bearing 090. Kincaid was out the door before the announcement finished. Naomi and the others followed, trailing the Admiral through the maze of corridors until they emerged onto the destroyer's bridge. The officer of the watch pointed wordlessly through the forward windows. There, barely visible through the rain, a sleek black submarine had surfaced approximately 500 yards off their port bow. No flags. No markings. Kincaid grabbed binoculars. "That's not one of ours." As if in response, the sub's hatch opened. A single figure emerged, climbing onto the wet deck with familiar ease. Colonel Volkova. Even at this distance, Naomi could see the woman held something. A briefcase. She raised it overhead in clear view of the destroyer, then turned and dropped gracefully through the hatch. The submarine began diving before the hatch even closed. Kincaid slammed his fist against the bulkhead. "Son of a bitch!" Mercer appeared at his side, her face unreadable. "It's done. She's gone." Naomi watched the last ripples where the sub had been. One briefcase still out there. One bomb. And Volkova had just demonstrated she could deliver it anywhere. Gabriel moved to stand beside Naomi. "This isn't over," he murmured. She nodded, watching the empty ocean. Not by a long shot. The USS Michael Murphy's medical bay smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Naomi sat on the edge of an examination table while a young corpsman stitched the gash on her temple. The ship's gentle sway was a stark contrast to the violent lurching of the doomed airliner just hours before. Lynn occupied the next bed over, her ankle wrapped in an elastic bandage. She'd refused stronger painkillers, insisting on staying alert. Gabriel and Powell stood near the door, engaged in low conversation with a Navy intelligence officer whose name Naomi hadn't caught. The corpsman tied off the final stitch. "Try to keep it dry, ma'am." He handed her a small mirror. Naomi studied her reflection, the dark circles under her eyes, the bruising along her jawline. She looked every bit as exhausted as she felt. The door hissed open, admitting Admiral Kincaid and Mercer. The DIA deputy director carried a tablet, her expression unreadable. "Everyone's clean," Kincaid announced without preamble. "No tracking devices, no hidden surprises." He nodded to the intelligence officer, who left quickly. Mercer set the tablet on a rolling tray. The screen showed a frozen image from the Maersk Dubai security cameras. The elderly woman, Volkova, boarding with the other passengers. "We've confirmed she traveled under the name Margaret Peabody, retired schoolteacher from Vermont." Gabriel snorted. "Original." "Her documents were flawless," Mercer continued, unamused. "Which means she had inside help." She swiped to another image. Volkova in the boarding tunnel, pausing to adjust something in her carry-on. "We believe this is when she planted the first bomb." Naomi leaned forward, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. "You're saying Ethan wasn't working with her?" Mercer exchanged a glance with Kincaid. "We don't believe so. His motives appear to have been purely personal. Volkova simply took advantage of the chaos." Powell crossed his arms. "Convenient timing." "Nothing about this was convenient," Mercer snapped. She pulled up a new image, the 2 fake agents on the ship's deck. "These men aren't in any database we've checked. Private contractors. Likely. The corpsman finished with Lynn and discreetly exited. Gabriel waited until the door closed before speaking. You're missing the bigger question. Who was Volkova delivering those bombs to? Kincaid's jaw tightened. That's classified above all your clearances. Naomi met his gaze evenly. With all due respect, Admiral, our clearances didn't stop us from nearly getting killed today. A tense silence followed. Mercer broke it, tapping her tablet to display a map of the eastern seaboard. The Ares 7 is a prototype. Requires 3 specific biometric keys to arm. Volkova had 1. The other 2. She trailed off meaningfully. Lynn gasped softly. You think they're already here? In the States? Mercer didn't confirm or deny. Instead, she zoomed the map to show New York City. Flight 227 originated at JFK. We have reason to believe the recipient was waiting in Los Angeles. Gabriel frowned. Then why not fly direct? Why the layover in? He stopped abruptly, eyes widening. Naomi saw the realization hit him the same moment it did her. The hijacking, she breathed. It forced an early landing. They never meant to reach LAX. Mercer's silence was confirmation enough. Kincaid checked his watch. We'll be docking in Norfolk in 6 hours. Until then. The ship's alarm cut him off, a shrill, pulsing tone Naomi recognized from her military days. General quarters. A voice came over the 1MC. All hands, man your battle stations. Unidentified aerial contact bearing 270, closing fast. Kincaid was out the door before the announcement finished, Mercer close behind. Naomi and the others followed, moving against the tide of sailors rushing to their posts. The bridge was controlled chaos when they arrived. Officers clustered around radar displays, their voices tight with tension. Through the forward windows, the sky had darkened with approaching nightfall. Where is it? Kincaid demanded. The tactical officer pointed to a blinking dot on his screen. Supersonic inbound, sir. Not responding to hails. Naomi's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming before the officer added. "Ita 90 seconds. Kincaid didn't hesitate. Sound collision. Brace for impact. The alarm changed to a piercing wail. Sailors grabbed for handholds as the ship's defensive systems activated automatically. Gabriel pulled Naomi and Lynn down behind a console. If that's a missile. It wasn't. The unidentified craft shot past the destroyer at Mach 2. Its sonic boom rattling the entire ship. Naomi caught only a glimpse. A sleek, angular shape unlike any aircraft she'd ever seen. No visible markings. No running lights. Then it was gone, vanishing into the low clouds. Silence descended on the bridge. Slowly, crew members began returning to their stations. Kincaid's face was pale. What in God's name was that? No one had an answer. Mercer, however, looked unsurprised. She met Naomi's eyes across the bridge, her expression grim. When she spoke, her words carried an unspoken warning. It's starting. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of debriefings and medical checks. Naomi found herself in the ship's mess hall, picking at a plate of lukewarm pasta while Lynn dozed fitfully across from her. Gabriel and Powell had been taken elsewhere for additional questioning. A shadow fell across the table. Mercer slid into the bench opposite, placing a steaming mug between them. Drink. You look like hell. Naomi eyed the coffee but didn't touch it. What aren't you telling us? Mercer studied her for a long moment before responding. How much do you know about private military contractors? Enough to know Ares Defense isn't just another security firm. A humorless smile. No, they're not. Mercer lowered her voice. 3 months ago, one of their research facilities in Nevada went dark. No distress calls. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Naomi's skin prickled. What were they researching? Officially? Next-gen drone technology. Mercer sipped her own coffee. Unofficially? We believe they were developing a new kind of biometric weapon. One that could target specific individuals based on DNA markers. The implications hit Naomi like a physical blow. You think Volkova stole prototypes? We know she did. What we don't know is who hired her. Mercer's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression darkening. We're docking early. Norfolk's been evacuated. Naomi stood so fast her vision swam. The bomb. She's bringing it ashore. Mercer didn't deny it. Come with me. She led Naomi through a series of corridors to a secure compartment deep in the ship's belly. Inside, Gabriel and Powell stood over a table displaying a high-resolution map of the Norfolk Naval Base. Powell looked up as they entered. "You're not gonna believe this." On the table, security footage showed the black submarine surfacing just outside the Norfolk exclusion zone. Volkova emerged again, this time dressed in civilian clothes. She boarded a waiting speedboat and headed straight for shore. And she wasn't alone. 2 figures waited on the dock to meet her. Even through the grainy footage, Naomi recognized them instantly, the fake agents from the Maersk Dubai. Gabriel tapped the screen, zooming in on the briefcase one of the men carried. "They've got it, and they're moving inland." Mercer checked her watch. "Local authorities are setting up checkpoints, but nothing," Powell interrupted. "These people just hijacked a plane and stole a damn submarine. You really think traffic cops are gonna stop them?" Naomi studied the map, her mind racing. The roads out of Norfolk, the possible destinations. Then it hit her. "They're not going far," she said suddenly. "Look." She pointed to a facility marked on the outskirts of the city. "Ares has a research lab right here, 20 miles from the docks." Mercer's face went pale. "That's not possible. That facility was decommissioned after." The ship-wide intercom crackled to life before she could finish. "All hands, prepare for arrival. Dock in 5 minutes. Admiral Kincaid reports all civilian personnel will debark immediately upon mooring." Gabriel met Naomi's eyes. "We're being cut loose." Mercer didn't contradict him. Instead, she reached into her jacket and produced 3 nondescript keycards. "These will get you into the Ares facility, if you're right about their destination." Naomi took one of the cards. "What aren't you telling us?" For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Mercer's usually impassive face. That lab was working on something called Project Icarus. And if Volkova's buyers get their hands on it, a single bomb will be the least of our problems. The Norfolk docks were eerily quiet as Naomi, Gabriel, and Powell stepped off the destroyer. No bustling port workers, no idling trucks. Just a handful of armed National Guard troops directing them toward a waiting line of Humvees. The evacuation order had cleared the entire area. Lynn had been taken to a secure medical facility, despite her protests. Mercer disappeared the moment they docked, leaving only the keycards and a terse warning. "Stop them before they reach the lab." A young guardsman handed them a set of keys. "This one's yours, sir," he said to Gabriel, pointing to a black SUV with government plates. "Admiral's orders." Powell didn't wait for an explanation. He climbed into the driver's seat while Naomi and Gabriel took the back. The engine roared to life, and seconds later they were speeding through the abandoned naval base. Naomi checked the handgun Gabriel had procured from somewhere, a standard-issue M17 with 2 full mags. "How far to the lab?" 18 minutes, Powell said, swerving around a checkpoint barrier. "Assuming no roadblocks." Gabriel studied the keycard Mercer had given him. "These won't get us past armed resistance." "They're not expecting us," Naomi said. "Volkova thinks we're still on that ship." The SUV's radio crackled to life with a burst of static, followed by a voice Naomi recognized. "Mercer. Repeat. Satellite confirms 3 hostiles entering Ares facility. All local units maintain perimeter. Do not, I repeat, do not engage." Gabriel grabbed the mic. "Mercer, what aren't you telling us? What's Project Icarus?" A long pause. Then, "Bioweapon keyed to genetic markers. Ares was developing it for surgical strikes. Volkova's buyers plan to weaponize it for mass casualties." The transmission cut out. Naomi's blood ran cold. A bomb could level a city block, but a targeted bioweapon? That could wipe out entire populations. Powell floored the accelerator. The Ares research facility loomed out of the darkness, a sprawling complex surrounded by high fences and warning signs. The front gate stood slightly ajar, the guard booth empty. They approached on foot, weapons drawn. No lights shone in the windows, but fresh tire tracks in the mud told them they weren't alone. Gabriel swiped his keycard at the main entrance. The door clicked open, revealing a darkened lobby. "Split up," Naomi whispered. "Powell, check the east wing. Gabriel, west. I'll take central." They moved silently through the corridors, flashlights cutting thin beams through the dust. The place had clearly been abandoned for months. Overturned chairs, empty coffee cups, layers of grime on every surface. Then Naomi heard it, voices echoing from deeper inside the building. She followed the sound to a heavy security door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The keycard reader glowed green. Taking a deep breath, she swiped Mercer's card. The door hissed open. The room beyond was a high-tech lab, its walls lined with refrigeration units and computer banks. At the far end, Volkova stood over an open briefcase, her elderly disguise discarded in favor of tactical gear. The two fake agents worked at a terminal, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen. And on the table between them, 3 vials of amber liquid connected to a central device. Project Icarus. Naomi ducked behind a lab bench, counting silently to 10. Then she moved. Her first shot took the nearest agent in the shoulder, spinning him away from the console. The second went wide as Volkova dove for cover, returning fire with a compact machine pistol. Gabriel burst through a side door, his weapon barking twice. The second agent went down clutching his leg. "Seal the room," Volkova shouted in heavily accented English. She slammed her palm against a red emergency button. Metal shutters began descending over every exit. Powell barely slid under one before it closed, rolling to his feet with his sidearm ready. Volkova backed toward the bioweapon, a pistol now pressed against the central device. "One more step and I trigger it here. Now." Everyone froze. Naomi kept her weapon trained on Volkova's center mass. "You won't. Your buyers want it intact." The Russian woman smiled coldly. "You think I care about money? This was never about money." A flicker of movement behind Volkova caught Naomi's eye. Gabriel, inching closer along the wall. She needed to keep the woman talking. "Then what? Revenge? Justice?" Volkova spat. "For Grozny. For Aleppo. For every city your weapons have turned to ash." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Now you will know." Gabriel lunged. Volkova spun, firing wildly. One round grazed Gabriel's arm, but he kept moving, tackling her to the ground. The pistol skittered away. Naomi was on the bioweapon in an instant. The display read, "Activation sequence initiated. 030 00:29. No, no, no." She studied the connections frantically. 3 vials. 1 central dispenser. No obvious kill switch. Powell appeared beside her, his big hands hovering over the device. "Can you stop it?" 015 00:14. Naomi traced the wiring. The system was designed to be tamper-proof. Any attempt to disconnect the vials would trigger immediate dispersal. 010 00:09. Gabriel grunted as Volkova landed a vicious elbow to his ribs. "Naomi!" Then she saw it, a secondary power source tucked beneath the main housing. A backup battery. 005 00:04. She yanked it free. The countdown froze at 003. For 1 heart-stopping second. Nothing happened. Then the entire system powered down with a quiet beep. Volkova screamed in rage, bucking Gabriel off with surprising strength. She scrambled for her weapon. Powell shot her twice in the chest. The Russian woman collapsed against a lab bench, sliding to the floor. Blood bloomed across her shirt, but her eyes remained open, fixed on Naomi with eerie calm. "You don't understand," she gasped. "This war never ends." Then she went still. Silence descended on the lab. The 2 surviving agents groaned from where they lay wounded. The bioweapon sat inert on the table. Gabriel checked Volkova's pulse, then shook his head. He retrieved her weapon and moved to secure the others. Powell exhaled sharply. "Now what?" Naomi studied the deadly vials. "Now we call Mercer." 3 days later, Naomi stood on the balcony of a DIA safe house, watching the sun rise over the Virginia countryside. Behind her, the television played muted news coverage of a training accident at the Norfolk Naval Base. The door opened. Gabriel entered, his arm in a sling. "They're gone," he said without preamble. "Both agents. Transferred to some black site." Naomi wasn't surprised. "And the bio-weapon? Where it belongs." He joined her at the railing. "Mercer wants to debrief us again at 0900. She nodded absently. The morning air smelled of cut grass and damp earth. Normal things. Peaceful things. "They'll try again," Gabriel said quietly. "People like Volkova. Like Ares." Naomi watched a hawk circle over the distant trees. "I know." Inside, the news cut to footage of Flight 227 survivors reuniting with their families. Lynn appeared briefly, hugging a little girl, the one Naomi had pulled from the wreckage. Gabriel followed her gaze. "We saved a lot of people." "Yeah." Naomi turned away from the sunrise. "Let's go make sure it stays that way."